And Kathy, would you join?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi. All right, wonderful. I know we didn't get quite all of that video, and I just wanted to assure you all that all of these videos are already recorded and will be available on YouTube and our website, and we'll be sharing them widely. So we apologize for the technical issues, but we wanted to get started with something a little bit more interactive with Bea since we have her here live. So I'm grateful for that. First of all, Bea, before I give you some of the questions that have been already put in the chat and while others start to share them, is there anything you'd like to add that was maybe missed a bit as that didn't get as the video was going?
Yeah, I sure do hope people will go ahead and watch the whole video. Because it does the point of it is that and I'm maybe going to just kind of jump in and say that, I love what Pat Watkins was asking, and I mean Pat's a little bit of a ringer. I think he knows the answer to that question better than I do, but the point is that because our faith communities do have global ministries, because we are in relationship with people all over the world, we have the opportunity that a lot of our colleagues in secular climate work don't have, honestly, to understand what really we mean when we say that vulnerable people are being hurt and killed because of climate change, and that climate change is doing damage that really can't be undone. Now, Michael Malcolm is going to tell you, oh, wait, did I go to speaker view? No. Okay. Michael Malcolm is going to tell you, you sure don't have to go anywhere else in the world besides probably your own state to be able to see what damage climate change is already doing and who it's already hurting. And that's definitely true. But I think because faith communities have global ministries, and it's not just United Methodist Church and PCUSA, of course, but also, and I'll just share since he's here anyway, there's Robert Morehead, the other half of the Morehead Climate Justice Team, because we're all over the world, we have an opportunity to connect those issues. And what I love the theme of this conference, because it really is about taking the local issues, the global issues, and making them local to where you are and where you can do the work. So climate change, and hopefully the video was at least a little bit audible for most people. Climate policy is a global issue. The United States isn't going to solve it by ourselves. The states aren't going to solve it by themselves. Your community, however great you're doing buying renewable energy, you're not going to solve it by yourselves, and neither are any of the other countries. It's going to be all of us working together. The faith community has not just a paradigm for understanding what we teach in my class at Austin Seminary. One of the books that we use to teach the class is The Great World House, which is about Martin Luther King's speech about the Great World House. It's not just that we have a paradigm. It's not just that we have a theology. It's that we have lived experience in the ministries and missions that we do that give us the stories that our leaders need to hear. So just to wind it up really quickly, I will say, if there's any one thing we need, I show that there's 122 participants on this Zoom right now. What we need is for all 122 or 123 at least, because Robert Morehead's here too. We need everyone on the Zoom to be thinking in terms of Zooming or calling with your member of Congress, probably as soon as the election's over. Most of them are, busy, but we need the way the faith community gets involved in policy is that we step out into the public square. So we need to call our members of Congress and ask them to have a conversation. The conversation isn't theoretical. It is no longer about, do you believe that climate change is happening? Or do you believe that it's human induced? Or just sort of generally conceptually, what do you think we should do? We should definitely get away from fossil fuels. That's not that helpful. This summer, the US House put out a report. It was called the House Select Committee on the climate crisis. And in the video, there are links. So if you go to the video, you can find it. But I bet some nice person, maybe that nice John Hill, would post the link to the House Climate Report in the chat. We're doing visits in Texas with every member of the Texas congressional delegation, whether or not they are someone who we think is particularly interested in climate change, to talk about the recommendations in this report that particularly talk to the issues that faith communities know the most about. That's not, for example, usually battery storage. There's probably somebody on this call who is an expert on solar energy and battery storage, and that's great. If you are, then you should definitely leverage that. But for the people who are not, like me, for example, what I'm the most familiar with is things like hunger ministry in my local community, or the fact that every faith community in Texas is engaged in disaster response every single year. Those are the issues. The issue that we have migration across the southern border of the United States, and whether the people are coming from Somalia or El Salvador or Eastern Europe, they're coming because of climate change. They are coming because climate change is causing strife in their country. It's causing their farm no longer to be able to be workable. It's ruined their village. It's destroyed it so that they can't participate. They can't make a living and live there anymore. I see a comment: all of Alaska's congressional representatives and candidates for all parties oppose the Green New Deal. That's not what we're talking about, though. We're not talking about the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is definitely one part of the advocacy that you could work on, but the legislators, the members of Congress from Texas mostly are not so into the Green New Deal either. But we had a meeting with a very conservative member of Congress from Texas recently, and we said, one, have you seen this report? And they said, no, haven't. That's right, climate refugees. They said they hadn't seen the report at all. Well, we said, well, we'd sure like to show it to you. And also, do you know that some of the recommendations in it have to do with human migration and with disaster response? And they said, oh, that sounds interesting. You know, we have a lot of refugees in our community, and I've historically been a champion. And then we said, well, you know, the military is weighed in on this climate report, and they're very concerned about the future of national security. And the member of Congress said, well, gosh, we have 2 military installations in our district. You don't have to be able to talk about every single part of climate change to be able to talk about some part of it. When we showed that picture of those gears fitting together, that's the big crazy thing about climate change. It impacts every other issue. So I'm going to stop there because I think this is turning into a filibuster, perhaps. But
I think there are a couple other questions. Yeah,
Yep,
I think there are a couple others. So that's great. So a particular question from Paul Slentz, who's in Tennessee, in terms of specific kinds of successes you may have had in Texas, whether that's regard to, you've talked a bit about talking to your delegation, but anything in specific in the state that you might lift up that's happened that you could lift up, either in that sense or perhaps in the way that you've organized there.
So actually, I will say, I mean, yeah, it's been a rough minute here in Texas politically, and as far as natural disasters and all of that stuff. I'll give you 2 quick things. One is that I would say the issue of migration is the way into this issue in the state of Texas. Probably that's true in Arizona, New Mexico, maybe California, possibly Florida as well. That's the issue that people can't look away from because the migrants are coming here. The second, I mean, an issue that all of us can attach to is the issue of disaster response. A great thing to talk about disaster response is not, so how are you going to end climate change, which at this point isn't a meaningful question. Instead, it's to say, since we know that it's happening, and we can see who is disproportionately impacted, how can we work together to mitigate that? How can we make sure that low-income communities, communities of color, indigenous communities are not disproportionately impacted, that we have resources in place and are ready to go, since we know this is going to keep happening. So I think there are conversations that we can have. The one other thing I'll add is that in Texas, even though super conservative in many ways, renewable energy has traction in Texas, surprisingly more than you might think. Because why? It's a market issue. We have people in Texas making money more and more from renewable energy. So I think that's one that eventually people are going to say, it's nice that your faith impels you to buy green energy. Now it's also just a good economic choice.
Great. If please, folks, if you have any further questions, throw them into the chat. I'll throw out one. So one of the things that we've been excited about and that this summit represents, even though it's not in the ideal way that we would like in terms of meeting face to face, but the idea of organizing in faith communities gives us the opportunity to organize within an institution that is already organized, right? We already have annual conferences in every state and throughout the, what recommendations might you offer? What ideas from the Presbyterian Church or from your work in Texas that of how we organize within these institutional churches that make use of the organizational structures that already exist? What are some of the benefits and structure and challenges, as well as some of the real gifts that gives us in terms of organizing?
Well, I guess I want to say first, as Presbyterians, we usually, Robert says, what's with the Methodists? They're so organized. They must have a method, right? So you guys are, okay. So all of us who are in connectional denominations do have that in common. We are everywhere from the local congregation to the national denomination, or in some cases, in your case, the global denomination. The trick is that people in a local congregation don't necessarily know what's going on. If we talk to Methodists, I'm sorry to say this, I bet you know that it's true though. If we talk to Methodist women in Texas, they largely don't quite get the social principles. They certainly don't understand the whole hierarchy of the connectional denomination, which is not any different than all the people who don't understand that the person who represents them in Congress isn't the same person who represents them in the state legislature. People have a hard time with these structures, right? What we call the Brady Bunch tic-tac-toe board. So who can cut through that often? If you're in Texas, it's Texas Impact. We are the organization that is there to help you relate those global and state and national ministries to local congregations who may not be super plugged into the connection, but they probably are plugged into other stuff that's going on locally. And they may not know who the United Methodist Church is 2 towns over, but they likely know who the Presbyterian Church is 2 blocks over. So the reason that we're a helpful partner, and if you're in Texas, it's us, but if you're in Virginia, it's our colleagues, the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. If you're in Kansas, it's Kansas Interfaith Action. There is one of us in pretty much every state. If you think your state doesn't have a statewide network hub, let me know and I'll point you to who it is. But that's the unique role that organizations like Texas Impact play in this space, is that weirdly, they help us bring your people back to you.
A couple other questions that I've captured out of the chat in terms of how you might get your local congregation to get beyond square one. And then that somewhat relates next to, then how do you also get on the other side, that's on the grassroots, and then on the hierarchy side, how do you get the hierarchy of the church, the staff, the bishops to be involved? This effort, as the person is saying, it has been really grassroots, which is part of the power of it, but also how do we work both ends of our connections?
So that's great. And I will say, like, the way that you work any of it is to make sure that you're working all of it. I want to say a really, really super quick story. When I first had this job, I got to meet with an Episcopal bishop he's since died, but he was well known for being a community organizer before he was a bishop. And he told this story. He said, because it's a metaphor. He said to me, just remember, working on social justice in the faith community is like that act that the guy used to do on the Ed Sullivan show, where he had all the plates on sticks, right? And he would start the first plate spinning and he'd work his way down the row, and he'd have to keep, and he said, the way that guy had to keep going around and around and around, that's how it is working in the faith community on issues of justice, because on any given day, only a few of the people are really spinning, and you got to keep moving it. So we have had good luck getting local congregations started when we don't say that the first thing they need to do is go to the Capitol and wave banners and shout. The first thing we have congregations do is understand what's going on in their local community. And we actually have a program. It's called Reimagining Service. If you are in Texas, you can contact me about it. But it's a 15-week kind of intensive on understanding how the ministries that your local congregation already is doing relate to human needs, environmental needs, in your civic engagement needs in your local community, and how the direct service that you're doing might be more effective if you come to understand that this isn't a question about charity or justice, that it's definitely an issue of charity and justice and bridging those two concepts. The reason that the bishops and other denominational leaders like Texas Impact is because they see their congregations participating. That's the number one question they have for us is, who in my judicatory, for example, who in my annual conference is working with Texas Impact? And when we say, well, this church is doing this project, and this guy went on a trip that we took to the border, and these folks are part of our Texas Faith Votes campaign, when they see that that's happening, they are very excited. And then they want to sign on to statements. They want to be part of the story. And so lately, what we've been doing is featuring those denominational leaders in our podcast. We have a podcast called Weekly Witness that somebody can put in the chat. It is interviews with kind of an amazing range of people, from police chiefs and legislators to bishops and members of Texas Impact's board. And Mel Caraway happened to have been on it recently. I bet he might be willing to put that link in there. And when those religious leaders find that people want to hear what they have to say about justice, they get excited about it too.
Nice. I think that from our leadership team, we're getting close to moving on to the next thing, but I'm just going to double check, make sure there aren't any other questions here. Oh, here we go. Here's a good one. At a time of scrolling here, I'll capture it and move it over here. At a time of immediate gratification through the speed of technology is so easy. We can just push a button to order food or ship things. How do you encourage people to put in the work, knowing that will take significant amount of time and effort for change to take place, change they may not even see in their lifetime?
Well, you have to give people, chewable chunks, right? They have to be able to see the result of something. So the way that you characterize what you're doing has to be in increments that people can achieve. Also, though, we say a lot, in the Jewish community, the Talmud teaches that you're not required to complete the work, but neither are you absolved from participating. The thing that we've been saying a lot that really helps people, I think, get their minds around the activity is no drop of water is the drop that makes the ocean full. And yet every drop of water is the drop that makes the ocean full. So when you wonder what your own particular effort means, it helps to think all around you, all over the world. And in the church, we can say, and in the Presbyterian church, we a lot of times say, the saints in every time and place, right? The great cloud of witnesses is there with us all the time. And we are living in that eternal now. So we shouldn't have to feel any kind of way except grateful to get to be part of the work that was begun before we were here, that will continue after we're here, and yet that is complete right in this moment in the fellowship that we're having right now.
I think one more question, and then am I right that we need to move on after this? But this seems like a good way to end it up. What recommendations do you have around being really bipartisan at a time that is really divisive? Let's see how this person stayed an enduring kind of path where, I'm just going to ask this, the person drafted it really nicely. How can faith communities help find an enduring bipartisan path here in the US while still going big, bold, and fast enough in line with what our climate justice crisis response demands? So that's a big challenge, but any thoughts on that? And then I think we'll move it to the next person to lead us in what's coming next. So,
well, the easy, fast answer to that is it's about relationships. When we think of policy, even really important ones that we really care about, yeah, big, bold, fast. We have 10 years now, almost 9 years, right? We all get that urgency, but we go slow to go fast here. If we turn our policy engagement into transactions, it won't last long, and we will end up doing more damage in the long run. And the proof of that pudding, I want to say, and I apologize if it hurts anybody's feelings, but the proof of that pudding is the Affordable Care Act. That by not attending to relationships, we sometimes end up doing more harm than the good that we got in the short term. So think about it this way. Everyone, the people you love, the people you can't stand, everybody in your community, all is there because ultimately they want to be part of a community. If they didn't, they wouldn't be there. And so what I like to tell our United Methodist women, and those of you who are UMWs, maybe you've heard this from me before, but think about policy and the way our political system works as duck, duck, goose. It's like we are all in a circle, and every once in a while it is somebody's turn to get up and run around the circle and be the one who's in the spotlight. But when they are done, they come back and sit down. And if there is not a spot for them, if they don't believe that they belong there, then they will go somewhere else where they can belong, right? So it's not just a question of nonpartisan or bipartisan. It is so much above the idea of partisan. This is about how do we love all of our neighbors. It is easy to love the ones who don't make us mad. It's hard to love the ones who we feel like should know better, are doing it because just to be, confrontational, who have bad motives. Joe Biden, who at least is the former vice president, last night, if he doesn't even ever hold another public office, said last night, he said that if we can't get to that relational way of being in the United States, then none of the rest of this is going to matter. None of the work that we do on climate is going to matter if we can't genuinely be in relationship with each other. So I guess, people can argue with that. Maybe the next speaker will say something a little bit more inflammatory than me. But that's my Presbyterian story, and I'm sticking with it, is that it is about relationship. And I will just I'm going to do one thing. I know you guys we have to keep moving, but I keep this book here, and every Zoom I do, I end up showing it. This book, Solving Tough Problems by Adam Kahane. If you don't have it, get it. If you haven't read it yet, It's really short. It's another one we're having our students read. It says a thing that a legislator from Texas says all the time. Is Judah Zaffarini from Laredo. Hablando entienden la gente. It means the way people understand each other is by talking. That's what it takes. The way of Jesus relationships. Thank you. I think I'm done here.
That's a perfect way to end it. And I'll just affirm that indeed, that the more I do this work over the last few years, the more I realize relationships are what it's about. And what I regret is that we're all not in a conference center where we can all get to know each other better, but we will be finding ways to build relationships across this movement through Zoom calls, through phone calls, through online tools, and you'll learn more about those as we continue. So, but thank you, Bea, so much for leading us in that. And I believe I'm turning it over to Michael for the next bit.